If we're out of balance and these spiritual gifts are not found and used, we are in essence disobedient, and that carries obviously a very, very heavy toll. Well, how then? I don't want to be disobedient. I want to be in my gifts. How do I find them? How do I get them moving? Well, we said relationship is part of it, and the second one is behind relationship was, what was the next word? Relationship and activity. Relationship is crucial, must be in place. Activity. How does activity fit in? Just being busy? No, it's not quite that. This is where I'd like to pull a little illustration. Here, I want to show you something, and maybe this will help us make sense. I'm going to shake this around a little bit because I'm going to think of this as a church. This is the church of the holy physics. Basic physics is what we're talking here. And in the church of physics, all of these different kinds of beads and crystals got together. And they're not really the same. Now, according to the laws of physics, if these things were in perfect order, mass, gravity, size, all of these things playing their part, all of these beads wouldn't be in random. They'd be in a particular order. The smallest would end up on the bottom, and the biggest would end up in the top. That would be the perfect order according to physics on all of these things. Now, so here we have this church. You can see it's somewhat chaotic because they're all mixed together. In effect, nobody's in the right place. They're just kind of wherever they ended up. That's kind of like church, isn't it? We all come in here, and at first, there we are. We're just all kind of randomly in the situation. So here we are. Now, this is a devout church. This is Canaan Church of Physics. And in here, these guys really want to be in the right order. But they can want to all they want. As long as nothing's moving, nothing's moving. It's going to stay the same forever and ever. Nothing will happen. So they get the idea. This is a funny thing when you're trying to grow spiritually. You got to shake things up. Things get noisy a little bit. Things get kind of going on a little bit. And that's what these guys decide to do. They start shaking it up. And they go into motion. And the more motion they go into, the more we see perfect physics having its way. If you can see, there they are. All the little beads are on the bottom. And all the big beads are on the top. And there is, if you can't see this one, you can see that one. See all getting shaken up. And all those beads just kind of going where they are. Interesting thing, though, you see, when you start shaking, everything isn't going to the right place right away. As a matter of fact, everything goes to the wrong place even more for a little while. They hit one place, hit another, but eventually, all the beads ended up in the right place. See, when we're in motion, an interesting thing happens. With the beads, it happened is that they gravitate to where they belong. Every bead has a nature, just like we do, spiritually, emotionally, all of this, especially in our gifts. Everyone has a nature, and as we're in motion, we gravitate to where we need to be. What was the trick? Being in motion. Moving somewhere, doing something, even if it didn't seem the perfect thing right off the bat, being in motion led to gravitating to where ultimately you should have been. And like these beads, ultimately, they all ended up where they needed to be just by the simple procedure or process of being in motion. Just being in motion. Can't find your gift if you're not in motion. It's critical. It's crucial. Right behind having the right relationship. There's a few other things we can throw in there just to help us along. So there we are. We understand this. We understand without relationship, context, direct interaction doesn't matter. Get context right, then you get the interaction right. and then you're in motion, you're trying activity, and as you're doing things, then what? Well, one thing you can know is as you're doing things, a gift, a true spiritual gift, doesn't fade away. I mean this. Who hasn't seen a movie, read scripture, heard a great sermon, and you go, man, that's what I need to do. I'm going to go to that island out wherever and save all the cannibals. That's, I'm meant to do that. And then you think about it for a week or two and you go, well, maybe not. Maybe that's not my thing. The inspiration wears off. But here is the thing to understand with spiritual gifts. You are saved. God infuses his Spirit in you. With that infusion is spiritual gift. By nature, you are changed. When something is part of your nature, it doesn't fade away. So there is a test of time. Get into motion. Be moving. And then if you're inspired on something, just let it face the test of time a bit. If you continue to feel that way, I know, I'm going to pick on you again, Brenda. I asked Brenda in the first service, I said, Brenda, how long have you worked with kids or something? She said, well, I don't know, it's longer than 16 years. I don't know, something like that. I think it's actually longer. But the point is, there are certain gifts infused in Brenda that if she does where she gravitates to, that's where she ends up. Spiritual gifts. It might be something else for you, but you will end up in that mercy place, that hospitality place, that teaching place. You'll end up there if you go into motion and you give it time. Another thing is to remember spiritual gifts are perfect, but you are not. I confess that story too. I said, at a time I was teaching, and I really believe that I was giving a gift of teaching, especially young folks, at a point in season in my life. But I remember the first time I ever taught young kids. It was so bad. The class was such a zoo that this was like a two-story church. Somebody from upstairs came down and took over my class because these guys were making so much noise that I was disrupting the major service with this class down there. That's the way it went, but not to be dissuaded. I mean, in time, yes, there are trends we follow, but just because we're not perfect out of the box doesn't mean it's not our gift. It's a process. God plants a seed, and we multiply it, and it blossoms in time. If we give it time, we keep at it. Don't be dissuaded. Give the process time. Another thing is to keep our ear to the ground. By that, I mean feedback. Now, this isn't really quite logical when you think of it, is that if you remember back as we looked at this whole thing of spiritual gifts, the place where spiritual gifts happens is in the church, which is the community of God. It is interaction. There's an outward, person-to-person thing going on. So if this is where the spiritual gifts are meant to be used, this is where the needs are, and then the mission of the church that goes out from here, if all of that is where spiritual gifts get used, is it surprising that we also get affirmation, not just inwardly, but from the outside? I know the same with me. The whole idea of even being a pastor wasn't my idea. Someone suggested that, and it hit me like a bolt of lightning. They said, have you ever thought of? And I said, no, I have not. It was brought from the outside and then affirmation along. Same with you, teaching, hospitality, greeting, whatever the gift that we looked at, any of these things. How is it with other people? Is there an affirmation? Is there an effect? When you try to help the community in a need, there's an outside affirmation as well as an inside. And I just want to qualify that a bit as never make that your primary filter. But it is a filter. It is something to take in mind, especially if it's people that we can really trust, people that we think are really right with God. It's worth listening to what they have to say. We have that. Here's the bottom line of the whole thing. Bottom line of the whole thing. In this section, we said, how do we know where to look for spiritual gifts? Well, we know this. One, if we don't have them, you're missing the major vehicle for fulfillment in your life, according to Scripture. If your Christianity is to have any meaning, it needs to be good and faithful servant. To know those are the two biggies to keep in mind is a healthy core. There must be a relationship with God that is active and living. And then there must be activity based on that. Get moving. Start serving in some capacity. Stay moving in whatever the capacity is. In these ways, gravitate towards where God would have you. That's the way we find the spiritual gifts. And the option or the alternative to not ever working within your spiritual gifts is really kind of bleak, isn't it? But these are ways we can know